Okay, so good morning to everyone. Today we have a busy day. It's 4 papers for us to discuss here. And what we chose for today, when we say Web 2.0, actually the way I chose the papers for today was basically all those papers that had 2.0 in their title. So it's a very easy way of doing it. Of course, starting with O'Reilly's 2000. It's a 2007 paper here, but it's a paper that tries to explain what Web 2.0 is and what those that coined the term there in 2004, prior to the first Web 2.0 conference, were thinking about what Web 2.0 was going to be, right? So we're going to discuss that. It's a long paper. I will not give it as much attention as it would probably deserve, because this is good for us mainly for historical reasons, right? O'Reilly was one of the guys that was directly involved in coining the term Web 2.0, and his company was responsible for the first conferences that discussed this issue in 2004, 2005, and so on. So they sort of shaped the way we think about Web 2.0 up to our days. Okay. After these, well, let me just very quickly here show what I'm talking about. The O'Reilly paper is this one. What is Web 2.0? Designing patterns and business models for the next generation of software. It was published at Communications and Strategies, number 65, first quarter of 2007. Then we'll discuss a paper by Andrew McAfee, Enterprise 2.0, The Dawn of Emergent Collaboration. I really like this paper, although it's again a paper that was written in the early days of Web 2.0. But I think it still has some very good advice for ways in which we can use, the collective intelligence principles that are there in Web 2.0 to build knowledge management systems for organizations. So I would say intelligent intranets that are not developed by just a few guys and imposed on everyone else, but intranets that can be developed by everyone in the organization and help others do their work. So, and you'll see that it's based on the principle of wikis and blogs and things like that, that are probably the first technologies that were there available to implement Web 2.0. Then we have Bonabo's paper, Decision 2.0, The Power of Collective Intelligence. You will probably, or probably as you read this paper, you were recalling many of Surowiecki's ideas in The Wisdom of the Crowds. And in fact, the author here mentions Surowiecki many times. So it's basically a paper that is showing that decisions taken in large groups can have advantages, and of course he also talks about the drawbacks, yeah, we'll spend some time talking about that. And then finally this paper here, Blueprint for Customers 2.0 by this Finnish guy or girl, I don't know, Repo, which is also, well, a 2006 paper, but was already trying to understand the ways we as customers could be involved in what he and other authors that we have already read call as a prosumer way of doing things, or a professional amateur way of doing things. Many amateurs have knowledge that is, if not comparable to the knowledge of professionals in many cases, at least that can help professionals do a better job. and then they explore this in this paper. So we will start by checking these papers, and then in the second half of our class we will go to our Moodle that I hope that by now you're already understanding as a mechanism of collective intelligence. I've been enjoying the way that some of you have been giving thoughts and provoking your colleagues even during the week. That's the idea. You know, of course we have a very intensive moment here on Friday mornings, and I'm sure that this is after a very intensive evening on Thursdays. I realized that some of you, as I was checking you know, the website this morning, I realized that there were people reading papers at 3 o'clock in the morning still, right? So I understand that this is a moment where we are sort of wrapping up things after reading, but there is plenty of time to digest these ideas more softly afterwards. And during the weeks after our discussions about a topic, you will still see that, you'll still notice that there are ideas come up to you, and you can contribute to the forums. I don't know how you have set your forum entries there, but I have set to myself in a way that whenever someone posts something there, the forums, that will appear to me as someone is as if someone had just worked there, and then I can either directly address the issue and maybe give another thought, or at least I am pushed to think about that again, right? So I hope and I would recommend that you also tick that in your forums, that field, or in which you say, well, if anyone comments on what was said here, I want to know, right? I promise that it's not going to be overwhelming, but that means that during the week you get in your email messages saying, look, someone has just commented on the forum here, and then that could spark your own thinking of collective intelligence again. Okay, so let's start with our first paper, or release. Hang on, I'm sort of lost here. As I said, a long paper. I think some of the examples that O'Reilly gives here for a few of the things that he's mentioning became very successful companies. Others didn't. That, of course, and of course, reading this paper some 11 years later, we already know which ones were the companies that succeeded and which ones failed. And in fact, some of the companies that he mentioned here and that failed, maybe we haven't even noticed, right? But still, I think what is important for us about this paper is actually summarized in the last 2 pages, pages 36 and 37 in the conclusion, where O'Reilly is talking about the competencies, or the core competencies, the central competencies of Web 2.0 companies. And of course, this is, if we just read those final sentences, it's not going to become clear to us, but after we have read the paper, it's a very good summary what was done. So he mentions a few characteristics of what they believe that is the difference between Web 2.0 and Web 1.0. I'll go straight to those differences here. Let me see if I get straight to the end of the. I think it's still loading the paper here. Okay, here are the conclusions. So the first one, services, not packaged software with cost-effective scalability. Notice this is a different paradigm to the paradigm that had been key to Microsoft's success and Microsoft and many of the other companies that had the DNA of information systems from the 80s and 90s, right? Here things are changing. Web 2.0 is a change in mind more. It's a mindset more than actually new technologies, right? They were envisioning here that software would not be packaged any longer. We wouldn't get new versions of the software. We would actually always have contact with a service, and upgrades to that service would happen even without us noticing, because it would all be not done in a package that we had installed in our computer, but in a server that the company fed with its software. In fact, I think it really starts the paper discussing the NASDAQ crash in 2001, when many people believed that the e-commerce had gone wrong, and traditional companies would probably prevail as they had in the 20th century. In fact, what was happening there, and now we're sure about that, but even then they could already claim this, was just some shaking movements, some rearrangements of power after, of course, there was a lot of speculation about the new companies based on the web, but people were starting to realize that some of them were better than others. Some were using the new technological possibilities to do the same that was done before. And those were not the ones that would succeed in the 21st century, right? Others were doing things different. What O'Reilly and other people that helped build the idea of Web 2.0 early in the 2000s noticed was that the companies that were web companies or e-commerce companies that were succeeding and that had survived the crash, the NASDAQ crash in 2001, were precisely those that had understood that the new technologies could allow different things to be done. So, and this happens many times with many technologies. It has happened, for example, even with electricity. When electricity was first introduced, people thought of it as a way of replacing other sources of mechanical power, maybe to push the same big, let's say, engines as had been the case of windmills or water propellers, water mills, and so on and so forth. But those technologies of the past had a severe impact on the way that production could be organized, because, of course, when you have a windmill and it makes an axle move, it makes it move only in one direction, and you have to convey all your production. You have to organize all your production scheme benefiting from that only movement, which means that you have to have pulleys and other sorts of arrangements to make sure that each part of your company that needs the power that is provided by that, let's say, called engine, can be used effectively. When the electric energy is made available, first people think of big engines, big motors. But it doesn't have to be like that, right? You can have several small electrical motors, each one of them supporting a specific, let's say, a specific activity, and that makes that provides with a lot of even layout freedom for the production operation, right? And that allows the operation to be much different to what it was before. But for many years, maybe 20, 30 years after the introduction of electricity, people were using it to do exactly the same as they did with other sources of mechanical power, right? So this explains why when in the early 2000s we have companies that are trying to use the internet to do more of the same, they are not able to get the same sort of results as companies that realize that with this new technology they can do different things. And the different things are the ones that they're showing here. So the first one is services, not packaged software any longer. Second one, control, where is it? Control over unique, hard to recreate data sources that get richer as more people use them. In fact, most companies that succeeded in Web 2.0 ventures are companies that benefited from what we call here even a network effect, right? Another company could possibly copy Google's engine. Well, in this case, it's probably not the case where we have network effects to use in an extreme way. But let's think of Facebook, for example. Facebook benefits from network effect because the more people that are there, the more people that will be there based on the fact that their friends are already there, right? Of course, we can always claim that, well, some of these authors were mentioning here, I think even, or really, we're mentioning Orkut. And of course, it's not there any longer. And then you say, well, so what was, you're claiming that there is a network effect, so Orkut should be there forever because everyone was there. And then even if another technology appeared that was technologically better, people would say, well, but all my friends are here, so keep here, right? Maybe what happened, well, Orkut was more of a Brazilian phenomenon than Brazil, India. There's some other places than the United States where Orkut was really big. It was never as big in the United States. Even before Facebook, they had other social networks that were more popular there. There are many possible explanations for that. One of them is that probably Orkut was better suited to the poor quality of connections that we had in some third world countries or some developing countries, right? While people in more sophisticated markets could already use some social networks that relied more on, well, that depended on more heavy traffic and which would make it really annoying to use here in Brazil. But let's say that Orkut was a huge international phenomenon and that everyone was there. Why would everyone decide to go somewhere else, right? Well, my explanation for that was that Orkut they never understood that they could explore the network effects to their benefit. They made it very easy for people to just import all their friends and just invite all their friends to go somewhere else at once, right? Try to do that at Facebook. Try to get a list of all your friends at Facebook with all the data that you need so that you invite them to, let's say we don't want to be on Facebook any longer, we decide to go somewhere else. Yes, because all these companies now, they realize that they have to make it difficult for you to switch and go somewhere else, right? So we'll probably find it a little harder. I mean, we may abandon some of these social networks for not feeling that they're providing us with as much value as they're draining energy away. I've seen a few people committing suicide on the web and saying, look, this is my first this is my last posting here at Facebook or whatever. You're not going to hear from me after this. I'm leaving, right? You see that happening, not very often, but you see that happening. And it's basically because people say, well, I understand that there's a lot of people here, but you know, I'm probably not feeling that I'm getting as much value as it is, you know, requiring efforts from me or requiring. But you don't see people leaving Facebook saying, yes, we are moving to a different social network, at least not that often. It will probably require, again, a shift in paradigm. It will have to be something so different and so much better, according to people's understanding, that they will say, okay, we'll go through the trouble of re-inviting everyone and you know, reconnecting, because Facebook is not going to make it easy for us to reconnect somewhere else. I think Orkut did. I remember I was never in Orkut, but my wife was. And I remember that she was even able to get a list of emails of all her friends that Orkut very nicely provided its users. So it was probably much easier for you to just say, look, I just found that Facebook is now available more easily here in Brazil, and it's a good alternative. Let's all try together, me and all my 5,000 best friends, right? You do that, and people moved fast. So we have to think that network effects sometimes will keep people attached to a specific company, because it's just difficult to move away. So an important thing here to succeed was to have control of these unique data sources. Not having a unique data or having a data source that someone else could mimic or copy and use the same way as you did, right? Another thing, trusting users as co-developers. Think of all the companies that survived and those companies that appeared after 2001, when we had the bubble and NASDAQ crashed, and you see that most of them have as part of their DNA this idea of involving their customers as co-producers of their business proposition, of their business value, right? Not only O'Reilly here, but the other papers mention many of these companies and the ways they do that. So we'll spend a little more time on that when we discuss the other papers. Harnessing collective intelligence. Okay, some of, or I'd say most of the companies that were really famous during the beginning of the internet use were companies that were not seeing the customers as partners. They were seeing customers or users of the internet as targets. And it's understandable, because we were coming to the internet from television, from radio, from broadcasting, right? In broadcasting, I talk, the rest of the world listens, right? The web was able to allow for different things to happen, but those different things had to be realized by people. It takes time not only for companies to realize that, but even for users to think, I don't need the internet just, I shouldn't use it just as a passive reader of content that someone has made available to me. I can also produce the content, right? Of course, users have to realize that they can do that. Technologies need to be put in place for that to happen. Companies need to understand that that's good for them to act that way. So harnessing collective intelligence is something that most of the successful internet companies since then do. And that happens if we think of Google, if we think of Facebook, if we think of eBay, if we think of Amazon, if we think of any of these companies. They are all very aware that the customer has something to say, and in fact that the customer or the user or can help improve the value of whatever they bring to that specific customer and to other customers. Right? Leveraging the long tail through customer service, self-service. You've probably, I think, well, he mentions here Chris Anderson's book, the Long Tail. It's actually, I think the name is a little different, but anyway, it's the book that deals with this concept of the long tail. And the idea of the long tail is related to the cycle of a product's life. Right? A product is introduced to the market. Well, then it is perceived by the market, and there is usually a fast, for those products that succeed, there is a fast period of increasing the numbers of and increasing the scale of production. Then there is a maturity period when companies do not have to put so much effort into continue to provide that product because all the facilities are already there. For example, during the time that you have this increasing in or speed up of production, you have to build new factories, buy equipment, and so on and so forth. So you're at one end you're profiting from the business that you're doing, from the sales that you're making, but on the other side you're spending on machinery and plants to be able to cope with the increase in demand as well. And then when you get to maturity, that means that well, the market is not increasing any longer, but there is a stable base of consumers, and that's actually when you get most of your profits, because that's when you're not needing to invest any longer in increasing production, but you already have plenty of you have plenty of business happening, and so you get a lot of profit. And then there is usually a period of decay, a period where, well, people or customers get interested in other products, and you see that sales go down, and you have to decide what you're going to do about the capacity that you have. You probably shut down factories if it's I mean, I'm talking about factories here because it's easier to think about physical products. But even if you're thinking about, you could think about a product that is intangible, like or a service or something, and still, when there's a lot of users, a lot of customers, you will have to need more people involved to provide that service. And then after people start going somewhere else, customers start going somewhere else, you have to demobilize your production operation, and that's what we call the decline period or the decay period. What Chris Anderson says is, in the past, during this decline period, you had to decide precisely when to abort operation, precisely when it was not profitable any longer to go on, and you should move on to something different, right? But then Anderson says that this is not the case any longer, because if there is one customer in the world interested in your product, and we are all connected, that customer will show up without the need of a lot of marketing and advertising and so on and so forth, and you'll be able to make that sale when it's required. So nowadays, with the technology that we have to connect people, connect customers to companies, we can think of, and in fact, in addition to that, in many cases, we don't have to have inventory any longer, right? We turn what used to be a sales of a product made, well, we usually say made to put in a shelf and wait for the customer in a shop. Now you turn it into a make-to-order production. You will only produce after the customer says, yes, I want to buy that. Right? Well, maybe this is not very so easy to think of, but let's think, for example, of a very easy example, a book. In the past, if you were an author and you wanted to have your book published, the printer would say, okay, how many copies do you want? 5,000 or 10,000 copies? And then you say, no, I just wanted 50, right? And they would say, no, it's impossible. The cost of producing 50 copies of a book is about the same as producing 5,000. So the minimum amount is 5,000. Many possible authors would never get published because they didn't have this expectation of selling 5,000 books. So you'd say, okay, so yeah, I will be an unread author, right? Nowadays we have technology that makes, at one side, it makes production cheaper and in smaller quantities. And in the other side, you can only produce when there are customers. So many publishing companies these days do not have the books on shelves waiting for customers to appear because they don't even know where those customers are going to appear. Are they going to appear in a bookstore here in a shopping center in Curitiba, or will the customer interested in a specific book appear in a bookshop in Rio? In the past, you had to have physical copies of the paper, of the book, in all those places where a customer could appear, because otherwise you would lose that sale. Now that people buy things through the internet, you don't even have to have the product, because whoever is buying through the internet has already in his or her minds the idea that it's an order. You will order a product and then it will have to be sent to you afterwards. In many cases, it will have to be manufactured and then sent, right? So what Anderson claims, and it's this idea of the long tail, is that even books that the publisher would give up and say, well, it's already in the decline period, it's not worth to produce any longer, they can keep let's say, at least a virtual copy on their website, and if someone clicks there and pays for it, they will print it, just that copy, and send to the person, if we're thinking of a physical copy, or they will send it as an e-book. The cost is practically zero to keep e-books on a virtual bookshelf. So understand that that this concept of the long tail today is makes much more sense than it would in the past. In the past, you would have to abort. For example, I'm sure that if you want to buy a video cassette recorder, technology from the 80s, you will go online and you will find someone that will sell that to you, right? Even today. Well, maybe if you have all the video cassette tapes from when you were a kid and you want to watch them again. Of course, if you're going to buy a video cassette recorder today, it will probably cost more than it would if you bought earlier. There is no economy of scale any longer. There's not much competition. There's probably just one or two companies manufacturing these things nowadays to support this market that is small. It's just the long tail of people that for some weird reason still want to have that technology. Even if you want let's say, let's go even further back, if you want a Super 8 film reproduction, or how do you say, a film projector, right? I'm sure that you will find, you'll be able to buy a brand new Super 8 film projector, because there are people that still have those were not, well, I think we call them tapes as well. They still have the film, and they want to see that, and they're happy to pay for it. In fact, that technology was very expensive technology in the 70s, And people that were able to spend money on that technology in the 70s, if they still, well, if their children are still rich, they'll be happy to pay, I don't know, $1,000 for a projector in this long tail thing, right? So it's easier to connect the demand with the supply and turn what used to be a production that was pushed to the market into a production that is now pulled from the consumer when there is specific demand. Right? Software above the level of a single device. The Microsoft's concept of one computer, one copy of Windows, one copy of Office, and so on, it doesn't make sense any longer, right? Even Microsoft had to change that after, well, it took them quite a while to realize that they had to change it, because whoever is winning in a game doesn't want to change games, right? So they kept insisting, but there was a time where they probably realized that if they kept insisting in selling packages, remember the first item here, they would be out of business. Someone else would see that we are in a different paradigm, and there would be no room for them. So they even the winners of a paradigm that is not there any longer have to at some stage either notice that they have to change what they do, or they will fail. Okay. And then lightweight user interfaces develop. Why lightweight user interfaces? Because people will use this, this new software from their mobile phones, for example, that are more powerful than computers that we had in the 90s, but are still not as powerful as desktop computers. So you have to think when you develop the technology, you have to think that people will be using it from other devices than they used in the past, right? So I think these are the main ideas of this paper by O'Reilly. I understand that it's a little lengthy as a paper, and you probably at some stage had the feeling that you had to go faster, and it's mainly because this was probably one of the first papers written on Web 2.0, and so it's for us the interest is mainly historical. Okay. Any issues, any ideas about this paper? Any other thing that you would like to remark? I always have something to say about the abstract. Remember, because I think that most of these guys do very poorly in. Pardon?
You have a video explaining how.
Yes, in fact, we'll be discussing that again, because we'll be discussing that again in one of the next classes, because as many of you will decide on developing a project, we want you to, you have to report your project, and one way of reporting your project is saying, okay, what am I doing with this project? The purpose of, or the objective. What is the methodology that I will use to do that? And what are the results that I have already gotten to, or what are the results that I expect to have after I finish this, right? And I find that many of these papers, of course, again, O'Reilly is not an academic, right? So we have to, we have to excuse him. But notice that the only important information that we have in the abstract is that maybe the three first lines when he says, this paper was the first initiative to try to define Web 2.0 and understand its implications for the next generation of software, looking at both design patterns and business models. This is not exactly the objective, but this is at least what Okay, we read that and we say, okay, so this is what he will be doing with the paper. But notice from then on, we have no clues. The remaining of the text in the abstract, that should be a summary of the main findings, is not there. Notice it would be much more interesting for someone trying to decide if you're going to read the, I don't know, 20-something pages of the paper, if we had, for example, that information that is there in the conclusion. You know, the summary of what O'Reilly and his colleagues believe to be the core competencies of Web 2.0. So if he wrote here, in this paper we'll be discussing in detail these core competencies that I'm listing here, and he could list all these competencies, then we would say, okay, I read, some of them I can already try and anticipate what he's going to say, others I can't, so it's worth for me to read the paper, right? But he doesn't do that, right? And then he loses an opportunity of helping us decide if we want to read the whole paper or not. And again, we're saying that if you go to Google Scholar, you will see that although it's not an academic paper, this paper has a lot of citations, a really huge number. So very successful paper, and we still can figure out ways of improving it, at least from an academic perspective. Okay. But anyway, do you have any other remarks, things that you
So something good to read for me. I have a company and we opened a software factory in 2001.
Okay.
We Ajax and other technology. We studied them and implemented them in years 2000.
And were you implementing Web 1.0 or Web 2.0?
2.0.
Were you? Okay, so that means that you were a visionary.
Yeah.
You know, I would say that most companies still need to do this even today, right? In fact, we should do this here. If you look at our, if you go to to our graduate school websites, you'll see that we have outdated information there, wrong information, and I'm sure that there's always some of the professor goes there and says, well, this is wrong. But then what we do, we say, well, I have to talk to the webmaster. Okay, I'll do that when I have time. And then we forget about it, right? So we have all these problems with the information that is there. Wouldn't it be better if we just had a wiki that we, those involved with the program, could all update at any time we saw that there was something wrong, or any time that we felt that there was something interesting to be added to. And then other people would always have current information available instead of looking at things there. Sometimes there are students that bring us a form, and I say, well, where did you find this form? This is the old form. We now have a different form for you to ask for that. Or you don't even have to ask that any longer. It's something that you can do on your own. But then they say, well, but it's in the website. And I feel like crying, you know, like, and that means we don't do what we teach, right? Another example, you know, with this, think of me going on this senior sabbatical now in the second semester. I spent almost a month trying to gather, you know, all the documents, the bureaucratic documents that university was asking me. And then when I finished and finally submitted it, they said, you know, these documents that you sent are not exactly the documents that we need. And I said, come on. I checked the university's website, and they're the ones that are there. And they said, yes, this is outdated also. And so I'm spending now a lot more time trying to fill in other documents because we don't practice what we should. And I'm sure that this happens in many companies as well. We don't have the excuse, but of being like that because we are a university and we are a public university or whatever. We don't have the excuse, but we usually have the condolence or I mean, you're easy on us, right? But companies that compete in the markets will not find it easy to compete if they're not doing the right thing all the time, right? If you were doing that back then in 2001, 2002, good on you, because as I say, many companies still have to do this these days, right? All right, second paper, McAfee. McAfee, 2006. As I had said before, I find this paper, it's a very, well, whenever you find a paper that is published in the Sloan Management Review, Sloan Management is a journal that is kept by the MIT, that is, of course, is an academic institution, but it's not a journal for academic papers. They are writing to the market. They're trying to make that connection between what we research in academia and hopefully the benefit that could bring to people in organizations, right? So it's again, it's not, they're not too concerned with having that specific format of an academic paper here. But Andrew McAfee is a professor at the university, so sometimes you notice in the middle of his writing here some concern, some more focus in trying to define precisely what the objective was and so on and so forth. Although this was not so much the case as for this journal. The paper is about what he calls, he has this acronym, SLATES, right? SLATES for things that should be there in what he calls Enterprise 2.0. Enterprise 2.0 would be let's say, the platform, the technological platform on which a company could base its knowledge management inside the organization. And what is then SLATES? He says it, I mean, if someone has done something in the organization already, it should be easy for all other employees to look for it so that they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They don't have to do everything that someone has already done once again, right? It makes sense that we don't have to go through the same efforts time after time without learning from our previous mistakes and also from our previous the situation that we did right in the past. So knowledge management is about, well, generating knowledge, but it is also about assessing knowledge, right? And he says then search is very important. Notice how easy it is for us today to search the web and how difficult it still is in many cases to search, I will call the intranet, right? I don't even know if intranet is still what the term that we should use for this, but the internal systems of the organization, that parts of the organization that is only available to its employees and not to someone else, right? It should be easy to search. When I need to, for example, when I need to look for someone's telephone extension at the university, you know what I do? I go to Google. It's the easiest way of finding it, is I go to Google. Because if I go, and of course, when I go to Google, I will find a link that is inside our, it's open because, of course, other people from outside the university may also want to talk to a professor or to an administrative person here, and that information should be open to everyone. But if I go straight to our website, I will find it difficult to access that. But if I go to Google, Google tells me where it is. Right? We should have, of course, when the information is not sensitive, when it's information that anyone could and should have access to, it's no problem that we go to Google. But there is information that we want to keep to not to the eyes of everybody, right? We just want our employees to know. They can't go to Google to look inside, the company's own databases, but it should be as efficient, or at least try to be as efficient as searching at Google. Okay? A second thing that McAfee considers important, let me see here if I can show you, is in this Slate's proposal is link. He says it's important. Let me see if I find. Notice when I say that he's a researcher, the concern here about explaining about the research, right? He's talking to not to academics. He's talking to people in the markets, in companies, but he's trying to explain where the information that he has here came from, and it's in this box here. So the link is, let me see where that is. I find it easier to find here in the paper. Okay, page 3. Links. The idea is if you think that whatever you have written in the intranet or in a knowledge repository of your company is somewhat related to other parts of it, providing links makes it easy for other people to also assess this complementary information. Right? So links here is important because it sort of transfers knowledge that was in your mind to someone else's mind, or allows them to go through the same path. Right? I got to understand this problem the way I do because I read this, or because I had access to this information or to this data, and so on and so forth. Third item, authorship. It's interesting here. He says, it's not a matter of believing that everyone is or should be like Shakespeare. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, another thing is that it's not mentioned on the paper is that it saves money to the company too, because like when you have links, you can reuse something. You don't have to, type a whole email again and send. So you save.
I don't know how if you have this experience. I receive emails every day that say, well, this is important information, but I don't need it right now. And when I need it, I will not be able to access this. I keep thinking that what should I do about this email? And then I just delete it, right? And when I need it, I will not know what to do, and I'll probably spend a lot of time figuring out who has that information. So it makes a lot of sense if instead of sending emails, that besides you're sending emails to people telling them, for example, I receive emails telling me how to, if I need to ask for a bus, for example, to take my students to a trip or something, what the procedure is. And it's very nice to know this, but will I do that in the next 3 months, even the next 6 months? No, so I'll delete it. And when I need it, I don't know who to ask for. So that kind of thing is exactly what McAfee is telling us, that we should build a knowledge base that is easy to access. And you'll see when he talks now about authoring, is that we should try and involve people. Not this authoring is involving the crowds, involving the collectives, not having just the webmaster including all that information. Because first, the webmaster will have his or her own needs that will be overemphasized. Well, if things that are important to this person will appear there more often, not because the person is being selfish and it's only what interests to me that will be shown here, but because we tend to think that what is important to us is what is going to be important to other people as well. And that's not usually the case, right? So it's important to involve Well, for all the reasons that we've seen and we'll keep seeing, diversity leads us to broader perspectives, for at least for thinking of good questions, if not the good answers to those questions, right? For things, you'll see that all papers that we read here are about the same, right? About the same thing, fortunately, because if they were all going in different directions, we wouldn't know what pattern to follow, okay? You know, Cunningham is the guy who introduced wikis. He developed the first wiki, according to McAfee. And Cunningham's point is not that there are a lot of undiscovered Shakespeares out there, right? So it's not, the idea is not, when you provide people the opportunity of authoring something, it's not because you want to check someone's, or make sure that we don't miss on someone's talents. Of course, those very talented would show up anyway. But the thing is, we're not looking for specific talent. We're looking for things that even untalented people know that anyone else, that other people don't. Right? This is, in principle, this is what Pierre Levy says in his philosophy on the collective intelligence. Every one of us knows something that the others don't. What we have to do is finding out, okay, what is the relative importance of what each one of us knows, and when that is important, and make sure that when that is important, that person's idea is brought to light. Right? So when everyone, and notice that even when everyone is publishing something on the web or in social networks or whatever, if that becomes available for future reference, that means that if we build the right tools, we'll be able to assess that information later. The thing is that we don't just want the noise of everyone talking about everything. We want to make sure that at some stage we can separate those things for or those issues in which a person is more knowledgeable and those where the person should be quieted. And you'll see that this will happen also based on the crowds, because the crowds can push you to the top of the list of what should be paid attention to, or pull you to the down to the, so that you are hidden from the others, pull below the rug, as we say here, right? The crowds can help also select what is important and what isn't, and we're starting to see that each time more often, not only on the web, but hopefully also in knowledge bases that are developed in organizations. Think that, for example, you include something in the intranet of your company, and people just give thumbs up or thumbs down. I don't know, Facebook likes only allows you to use thumbs up. In my case, that's the main reason I say I've never liked anything on Facebook up to today. I want to have at least the opportunity of saying, no, this is bad. Although I would probably not say. No, I haven't.
You have different images.
Oh, you do now? Okay, yeah, okay, yeah. You can say, yeah, but that doesn't, yeah, okay. But then you have to interpret what the person wants. I wanted to say, oh, this is bad. Right? Yeah, okay.
You can cry, you can just say.
Okay.
be angry.
Yeah, you can show all your emotions, but okay. But I would like to have, like I have this, I would like to have this as well. Okay. Maybe I do. It's just I go there so seldom that maybe it's all there now, and I should start liking things. But anyway, tagging, and I'm saying, of course, we would have to think of ways in which, because this is as a social thing, of course, we don't like being disliked. and we wouldn't like, we even have to think of ways of, we want people to contribute with their ideas. We never know when someone will come up with a clever idea, when they'll come up with a dumb idea. We want clever ideas to be shown so that others can build on it. We want to hide poor ideas, not because we want to hide them, it's just because we can't see all of them, we can't assess all of them and decide on all of them. But, so it's good to also use the collective wisdom to try and sort those things out. And that may be the way we'll go in the future with technology that helps us as humans filter ideas and show what becomes more visible to. In fact, we already do that, right? To some extent. What is going to get in front of other people's eyes and what wants. So yeah, okay. So authoring, tagging actually allows for what some authors are calling Web 3.0, web semantics. The possibility of users saying, okay, the author, or when Google pushes this in front of my eyes, it pushes this in front of my eyes because of this. But I think that this is should also be considered, or should also be brought to me because of a different, a different tag. So I think here he mentions, well, something is cute, but what is the example that he gives? Photos in Flickr, I think, and he mentions, I don't recall. I also read this at some weird time. But there is an example here of different categorizations that you could give to a specific piece of data, right? Which will allow us to have, instead of having taxonomies that are dictated by the author, right? That are, that the old way of doing it. I say, you listen, you build folksonomies, in which, depending on how people perceive something, it will be classified and shown to others. So folksonomies are a very important, or may become a very important way of classifying things on knowledge bases. Let the people decide if this is A, B, C, or D. And they will do good in general, based on that principle of the wisdom of crowds. Okay, so tagging is just providing you with the ability of doing that. And why would you tag something? Maybe you would tag something so that you can go back there. So for example, instead of receiving an email, if I received, or even if I received an email and that email could be incorporated in a knowledge base, I would tag, for example, with respect to bus, bus reservation. Because if in 2 years' time I need to reserve a bus, that would be what would come up to my mind, bus reservation. I would think of that, I would write bus reservation, and it would take me directly to that email, for example, or to that piece of information that is available somewhere in the, I'm still calling it the intranet. Okay. And notice that when I tag for myself, but I also tag for others. Right? Why not? I mean, of course, it will depend on the design of the platform, but why not using my tagging to support other people? If you read, I don't know how many of you read books on Kindle. And Kindle, many times I am here reading even academic papers, but more like reading a book, and then I'm highlighting something. And I notice that except that I'm highlighting has already been highlighted by someone else. I can read a book with the comments of other readers. I don't know if I want to do that, but I have this option, right? And after I highlight something, my highlighting will also show to other people. And maybe someone who doesn't want to read the whole book may say, I just wanted to check what other people highlighted here. I just want to see the parts that others found more interesting. And there is already some, well, I'd say there's a lot of intelligence in doing that. Okay, tagging, extending. Extending is the principle of, based on what you have tagged, based on what you've seen, based on information that was collected from your previous interaction with the system, deciding other things that would interest you. Think of an intranet, for example, where, let's say you tagged several things that were important to you because you're in the accounting department. But of course, you only tagged those pages that you saw. And then your taggings are compared to someone else's tagging, and maybe even considering that this person is also in the accounting department, and they notice that there are things that you didn't tag, or that you haven't seen, or whatever, and this other person has said that they've also liked. So the system will make sure that that will appear in front of your eyes. That's collective intelligence, because you're using and it's a way of making the system, the knowledge base more effective, because it's actually connecting your neurons with someone else's neurons in making it easier for everyone to deal with the information that is there available. And finally, signaling. Where is this? Extensions and signaling. Page 25, which means technology to signal users when new content of interest appears. Usually, well, probably the most basic technology to do that is RSS, right? Which used to be called really simple syndication. You decide you go to a website that has an really simple RSS button. You go there and you click, and whenever the content is changed, you'll be notified. Right? I remember that once I had, and this was probably at this time when these guys were testing with these things. I had my first page on a browser. As soon as I opened my browser, I had there some information that was fed from New York Times. It was a time that I don't know if New York Times still has that, but it was a time that they fed news to that way. You could tell, I want to know whenever you have a news about technology or whatever. So I had those. I had information on stock exchange. That was something that I was following at that time. I had news on the weather in Curitiba. I had so my front, I just got into the computer and I had a completely personalized front page with information that I considered important to me, and that was organized actually by myself, because I said what I wanted to see there. Right?
Were there RSS or widgets?
No, most of them were RSS tags, right? And well, I think these are the main ideas. Of course, then he says, right, but there are plenty of advantages here, but is it easy to implement? It depends on the culture of the organization, first of all. There are organizations that are more, how would we say, that are less democratic. And this is not good or bad. This is just there are more autocratic. The boss rules, right, and says it's my ideas, you follow, right? Of course, in a company like that, this kind of knowledge base where people have all this control and power would never work, right? So this is a first thing to consider, the culture of the organization. This kind of thing will work in a situation where people believe and trust the others and want to have solutions that involve everyone's ideas. And I would say in principle, most people say that they are like that. But in reality, as soon as the crowds start thinking or acting different to what you think, maybe you say, oh, this is not a very good idea, let's shift back to the way things were, right? So he warns here, McAfee warns us to the fact that this will not always work, because we have this issue of, of losing control, right? Control goes against open or more open platforms, right? In fact, notice that this, the kind of infrastructure he's talking about in this paper empowers people because it provides them with ways of doing their own things better. But as it empowers people individually, it also makes those that had control on the whole situation less powerful. And you have to be sure that they understand that, and that they're happy, or they accept that. So there's definitely need for managerial supports in addition to this receptive culture. You need a common platform, and notice that even developing a common platform may be something difficult to achieve in an organization, because you usually don't start from a blank page, right? People already have their own content, and when you say, look, let's give up what we had in the past, mainly if we had several different and separated things, and let's build something all together, those that have already built something may have some feeling about what they did, and may even have this feeling that their work is being thrown away or whatever. So there are emotions involved. It's here in the case of the company that McAfee mentions right at the beginning of the paper already. They say that they chose to have a large wiki instead of having several wikis for different departments, because they wanted the information to be shared with everyone else. But shared information means having to concern about this power issues among many others. They advise here that you should have, or you could, one way of introducing something like this would be an informal rollout instead of, starting from tomorrow on, this is the way we will work, right? And I think this is a good way of starting many systems anyway. Instead of, big bang, we start all from scratch. Until today we were using one system, tomorrow it's a different system. You select a few people that are more enthusiastic about the idea of the new system. You allow them to develop some showcases that can be presented to other people later. You make sure that they have the power, the time, the tools that are needed to succeed in this showcase. And then after you have a successful case, you present it to other people, and still in an informal way, and checking if other people would like to get involved, until whatever you already have there convinces the others that that's the way to go, right? But of course this was the way that they implemented it in this company that the author is describing. And then he mentions the challenges and opportunities that I think we had already talked about. Okay. Any comments about this text? You're quiet today.
Democracy and power are different things that
You know, this empowers people, and when you empower, exactly, this is an important thing. You know, democracy and power don't go along very well, right? And notice that all our companies have had someone in power, and this is something that has been going for at least 300 years. That's the model that we used for the Industrial Revolution. And in fact, when the Industrial Revolution needed a model, it went there and looked for other previous models and found it in the army, found it in church, where power was organization was very hierarchical, and there was a very strict power distribution. So we're talking here about chaotic ways of organizing, or at least more chaotic than in the past. So we shouldn't think that it's easy. At least it will not be easy at first. You have, and this is why they mentioned this idea of starting with informal projects and then showing that works, to gain confidence of people, to make even those that are in power understand that losing power in that case may represent something good for themselves, because it could make their businesses even stronger than they are with them in power. Okay?
I like the way you put there, the management part, how it will work if you do something about it.
Yeah, managing. There are many cases, many situations in which we say, yes, this is definitely the way to go. Nobody disagrees with that, and then you try to implement it and it doesn't work because you didn't consider all these things that are not said, right? And they're not said because nobody's going to say, well, this seems to be the way to go, but I'm losing control, so I'll not allow it to do it. People will say yes, and then they will do something different. So we shouldn't be naive, not necessarily easy, and mainly not necessarily easy for those that already have a structure, that already have a culture, but possibly easier for an organization that is starting from scratch. So this is again the opportunity of the small becoming the big of tomorrow.
And I think the biggest challenge is like what Twitter did.
I beg your pardon? What?
The Twitter,
Uh-huh.
he posted Twitter there, is to find a way to make people that would normally not contribute to contribute with
Mhm.
their
Mhm.
ideas there, like in a big
To involve, yes. And in fact, by the way, this is an interesting thing. Right at the end, he mentions that we usually say that small organizations are flexible because they're not so. Let me see if this. Hang on. Am I doing the right thing? No, I think it's one page before. Let me see where that is. You have to give people, where is this? Here. You have to give people a starting point that they can react and modify. You can't just give them a blank workspace and say, use this now. I'm confident that we'll hit a tipping point after which tool use will grow on its own. But we are not quite there yet. So we have to start and show people that this can be the way to go. Okay. Right. Then we have Eric Bonabo's paper. Bonabo is also not an academic. He is, let me see where that is. What I think at the end they say, Eric Bonabo is the CEO and Chief Scientific Officer of Ecosystems Corporation, a Cambridge, Massachusetts-based consultancy that specializes in the use of complexity science to develop innovative business strategies. Okay, so again, being a paper on slow management, not an academic paper, but I think again a paper that gives us some good hints on the ways that the collectives can help. In this case, he's concerned with decisions and how we can make better decisions based on collective intelligence. Basically, he talks about three things: outreach, get more people involved, more perspectives, different perspectives; aggregation, well, get different people to talk, and then use all of the information available; and then self-organization is how to select the information based on all the contributions that you have. The author explains here at the beginning of the paper already that we humans are not very, how does he say here? He's talking about the way we think, and it says the human brain is wired to avoid complexity, not to embrace it, and to respond quickly to ensure survival. You can think that we have not lived in the society that we live today, right? We've faced dangers that would not allow us to stop and think, is it better for me to, go this way to escape that dinosaur, or go that way? We just to go on based on our impulses and as a way of surviving, and these and now that we and of course we still are much more reflexive. I think there is a difference between you think about something in a reflexive way. So maybe what I'm saying, we are much more impulsive than reflexive. Reflexive in this way of, doing things, considering all alternatives and everything. But when we have lots of people taking their impulsive decisions, they will have those characteristics that we found in the wisdom of the crowds, and maybe as together they will allow for this diversity of thinking and allow us to get to better results. Some interesting things here with respect to this paper, I think, are already the questions that we can pose based on this, based on here first this question already here, the leading question: can the new tools and methods for tapping the crowds change how companies make their decisions? First, can they, and then should they? Will that make better? Will that help better decisions to be made? And notice here, well, this paper doesn't have here an abstract directly, but we have. So this thing here is the main question, which tells us what the objective was, and then he also shows us the findings here, which is the results, right? So in practice, tools using collective intelligence have performed better than theorists can explain. This goes back to, remember, that Galton experiment in 1906 or 7, I don't know. Remember that? And this has been, and that has happened many times. The crowds decide better in many occasions than individuals, and we can't explain that well yet. We still have to study that. Collective intelligence is better for idea generation than idea evaluation. In fact, this is he claims at the end that this is a speculation, right? At the end of the paper, he says, where is that? No, I won't find it right now, but I think he says, I speculate that we are better at generating ideas than evaluating ideas based on the crowds. And managers need to consider many key issues when designing collective intelligence tools, from loss of control, so this is something that was already discussed in the previous paper, to the balance of diversity to expertise. What is more important for me for the decision, to have experts or to have diversity? I think we've already discussed this a bit in a previous class when I said that if you're in a conceptual, if you're conceptualizing something, you're at a time where diversity may be very good because it brings perspectives that specialists would never bring, right? And it may even change the question or changing the problem that you want to solve before you start solving it. After you have your good question, after you have conceptualizing, and then you have to develop your product or your solution, it's time where possibly you will want to have more expertise and less different perspectives, because different perspectives then will divert the group from focusing on trying to get a result. Okay. The paper brings this table in which it shows the decision-making task, if it's generating potential solutions or if it's evaluating solutions. And then it discusses the biases that exist in the process of doing that based on that that assumption that we humans are impulsive and we react to a situation fast instead of considering all the options that we have. And then there is this third column here where he discusses some of the collective intelligence approaches that could reduce or mitigate those biases. I think this is a good, and then of course examples of companies that have done that. I think this is an interesting table for you to think of the biases that are in column 2 and see how collective intelligence can mitigate those biases. For example, if you are too self-confident, there is this self-confidence bias that is that you already you only want to find arguments to justify the solution that you already have in your mind, right? And then when you outreach this problem to a larger group of people, you will notice that there will be a diversity of solutions, and that again, if you're in control, it won't help much because people will come with different ideas to yours. But at least this shows you that the way that you're thinking is not so obvious. At least it's not so obvious for everyone. Huh? And then, so for each one of the biases, there is here an example of how collective intelligence can help, right? But and usually what the collective intelligence is therefore is helping us avoid the self-servicing bias, where we already know what we want and we don't want to reflect much about that. The belief perseverance, even when we have evidence that we are wrong, we keep insisting on our idea because we don't see that the evidence, or we disregard the evidence as being faulty, and we say, oh, this was just it happened, but it's not usually like that. It was just something that happened this time, but it's not the rule, right? And then when you outreach, you increase the diversity of ideas and viewpoints, and that helps you maybe reduce the self-serving bias. Of course, and the paper also mentions some problems with the collective intelligence approach, right? Risk of group thinking. Group thinking is when the group is when the group doesn't, there's no, one person is not challenging the other's ideas. Everyone is going with the boss, for example, right? And then if the boss says that it's that way, we go the same way, and we have the feeling, and everyone has the feeling that it was a decision taken in group, but in fact, it was influenced by someone that was powerful, or by someone who had this ability of convincing the others about their own ideas. Another thing is, if you leave it to the crowd to decide, there is some unpredictability, right? You don't know what the answer is going to be. And this is one of the things that is very difficult for managers to accept, because managers are there basically to manage. And to manage means to control. If they're saying, well, I'll leave it to the people here and see what happens, there is at least this feeling that I'm not managing the thing, right? Of course, there's also the possibility of disclosure of strategic information. If you're involving more people in decision making, that information that once was a secret is now available to many others. Are we happy with that? Are we okay with it? And also, another risk is that risk of a skewed sample. When the sample you have is not representative of the population. That's a challenge for, in science we always have that problem, to assure that the sample that we chose, and we choose samples because we don't want to deal with the census, with the whole population, because it's expensive, it's time consuming, and so on and so forth. But when we choose just a sample, are we sure that that sample is representative? Because if it isn't, then the results are going to not to represent what the overall group would consider it to be the best solution. Seeing patterns where they don't exist is trying to reinforce your own beliefs, right? You already believe in something, and then you tend to see patterns there, but they actually are not there. I say this happens when we're writing a dissertation or a thesis. That happens even in literature review, because you see people agreeing with you everywhere, and you keep bringing them to reinforce your arguments. And those that disagree with you and say, oh, nonsense. It's just this guy against, I will not care about it. In fact, we should care about those that have different ideas to us, because those are the ones that can illuminate our thinking. Even if it is for after having read and try to see the problem from that person's perspective, even if it's then to say, well, okay, the person is wrong because of this and that. But always there's always the risk that even when we try to do that, we are unable to escape our own original beliefs. But at least we should try, right, to do things like that. Well, he talks about how to engage people where is this engagement thing? A little further ahead. Well, here's talk about outreach, aggregation, self-organization. We think about control, diversity versus expertise, engagement. We will our next class is going to be about engagement. What motivates people to take part in a collective intelligence venture, right? And then he also talks a bit about policing, mainly with an attempt to avoid sabotage, for example, right? We will also have a class specifically for that, right? We should not consider that everyone has the same purposes as we do, right? We may be very engaged with a collective intelligence effort, and we think that everyone else that is there is going to be an ally, they will help us, or at least that they will not disturb us, but there will be situations in which there will be reasons for that. I think some of you have helped those undergraduate students of mine, Thais, and Mateus, that are doing their research, is trying to figure out when a review on TripAdvisor or when it's false and when it's correct. And why they're doing that? Because they realize that not everyone that contributes with a comment on one of those websites is doing that to help everyone. Some of them want to help themselves. For example, and I will already tell you a few. They're doing that after they did a lot of literature review, and from their literature review, based on their literature review, they decided on they wrote it's actually not at this moment, it's not an algorithm, it's more like a fluxogram, a flowchart of things that they should check each time someone writes some content to one of these hotel advising websites. And the first thing they notice is, for example, when a hotel has a really bad comment, there is a chance that there will be fake comments afterwards to try to improve it. It's of course the many times the manager is there seeing what happened here, and then he doesn't want people to see that there was a bad comment, and then of course it depends on his ethics and everything, but he may go there and try to make a fake review. So they notice some of the things are really obvious. For example, it's obvious that, or it's not obvious, but it's very unlikely that someone is going to go to a hotel in the city where they live, right? So when you see that someone is posting a review from a hotel and the IP is from a place near that, it's probably the manager, right? Mm-hmm. You can't assure, but it's there's a probability, right? There is a probability that after having a bad review, some good reviews that happens right after could be fake reviews to try and improve. Well, there's a probability that a review that brings details on the name of the manager and how good he manages and everything, that they're also fake, right?
I wrote a review. Actually, I went to Halifax, and I met both the
owners. Okay, it's.
I know her, and I talked to her on Facebook.
Okay, and then what you do, you will say, well, there are ways that you can find that out also. You see, when you talk, let's say, and you just mention the first name, wow, and the owner of this hostel is José, and he's very friendly. is one thing. It probably works more for more. It will not work for big chains, right? If it's a big chain, it's you're not going. You're not talking about the manager. If the manager did what he was expected to do, he's very professional, and you're not going to be enthusiastic about it. Of course, in a small hotel or a hostel or something, that happens. So there are. I mean, they noticed that there was a lot of remarks on the literature, and they basically had this flow chart in which they say, is this a situation? And now they're testing, the comments you made, the real one and the fake ones, to see how much their flow chart is able to depict if one of those comments was a real one or a fake one. Hopefully they will do good. But their attempt is really trying to prevent sabotage, as it will happen, because the interests of everyone are not necessarily aligned. In some cases, sabotage will happen for immoral or reasons. In other cases, it may just be that it's someone who doesn't agree with what you're doing and wants to make you fail because they don't believe that that's the right thing to do. So there will be sabotage that is done precisely for moral reasons. They'll say, no, this is not the way to go, and of course this is all debatable, but we'll have to consider sabotage in our projects. I think what else here? He mentions distributed. What is this? Distributed versus centralized decisions. Centralized versus decentralized decisions. In distributed decisions, many contribute to one decision. In decentralized decisions, there's an empowerment for own decisions by many people. They also discuss a little bit, or he also discusses property rights. Who owns the data when it was data that was provided many times by volunteers, or right? Of course, companies nowadays assume that if you contributed, and many times they have it in the agreements, it becomes their property. But is that the way things should go? Should we have our legislators decide? I think that in the future there will be a lot of work for legislators to help define if some of the agreements that we have with these companies that give us little candies in exchange for important information, if that information is really their own proprietary information, if it's our proprietary information, or whose information that really is. Some of these contracts, let's call them so, may be abusive because you don't have other alternative than accepting it. At least if you want to, it's not if you want to have the services of that company. Many times it's if you want to keep in contact with your friends, right? So we'll have to see that. Well, this paper is very Surowiecki in many of its assumptions, and of course the author makes a reference to Surowiecki in many moments here, but he definitely had read the book before writing this. Right? Then we have also examples here of situations in which collective intelligence is used to get to better decisions. The author provides examples in research and development and innovation, market research, forecasting, customer service, and so on and so forth. I think this table is an interesting table for you to have a good look at. Well, the author also mentions here, right at the end, the professional amateurs, which are going to be, where is it? Somewhere here. Where is the professional amateurs? Web 2.0 applications led to the increasing emergence of professional amateurs, right? And this is going to be the topic, the professional amateur, the topic of our last paper of today, Blueprint of Consumer 2.0. Any remarks with respect to Decisions 2.0? Anything that you want to comment? No? Well, at least you... Zuckerberg. Now with Zuckerberg's and the situation of Facebook with this leakage of information.
And actually, he won the game because he is now the one who will provide some information how to regulate.
Now he says it's exactly. Well, he let's say he won the battle. We don't know who will win the war, because it still depends on us as humans to get better understanding of what is happening, and that may take still, I don't know, maybe 10 years, 20 years.
Everyone is concerned about Facebook, but I would be more concerned about Google, because Google has like our emails, our search history, and like it's not like Facebook that you have the choice. No, I'm not going to use it. I'm going to delete my account. I'm not going to create.
I think that the issue there is not necessarily Facebook. It's just that there was this Facebook leakage right now. Okay, so Facebook leaked a lot information about a lot of people, so it allowed us to discuss this, and we'll discuss this each time more often, because this is not going to be the only leakage of important information from people. It's the excuse to discuss this, and of course when we're discussing about Facebook, we are also concerned with Google and all these other companies. I think, but I think that we're still not. I mean, notice that we are a group of people that are reading a lot and are discussing this, and I'm sure that when I'm talking about the candies that we receive to provide our information, many of you, as I myself, feel okay, but I like the candy, right? Or the candy is good enough for now. We are still not, and in fact, not even those companies, they're aware of how far they will go with using our data in the future. I noticed that Carla wrote, Carla is concerned that people are, that even the voice calls that you're making are being monitored.
Sometimes I was talking about something, and at a sudden when I entered in my Facebook account, there was a recommended ad about the thing that I was talking about. I was talking.
You're
about
talking on a,
searching.
right, yeah, you were talking on a phone
I
call.
was not talking, I was talking.
Oh, I see, okay, so it wasn't not even on the phone, okay, the phone was there.
The phone is listening to
Yeah,
what I'm
yeah.
talking.
Yeah, I hope that you're getting paranoid, but let's say,
If you watch Snowden's film,
I have, yeah. I hope that you're paranoid, but you'll see that, for example, my camera, I use this camera here because this camera here is always blocked, always with a, so, and in fact, but we can't do the same with the microphone. Maybe we should, just have a plug there and without a mic, so that they don't listen to us. I'm not. Hopefully, that's not the case, because we would expect that if that was being done, we would at least have to be aware of it. They would have to give us a candy.
You know that the smart TVs, they listen everything, and there is a Samsung warning, a disclaimer saying that everything is being
Really?
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot will still have to be discussed about this. Companies are putting a lot of effort in gathering this information. They are using it somehow, but we accept the candies because we say, okay, I still have, we still feel in control, right? We still feel that we can decide if we're going to, if they show us something that we can still decide if we're going to buy that or not. But things will probably, they'll keep pushing it in a direction that maybe in the future we'll say, no, that's too much. And we may review all of that and decide who should have that information and which information we would like to give and to whom we would like to give that information. But for now, I think we are still very happy with our candies. And in fact, most of the population are not even aware that they are exchanging their information. And as we are not aware that we are providing information when, to the sensors that we don't accept to be, that they are catching things without our awareness. Right, okay, so this was Bonobos, and then we have our last but not least paper. This is I'd say that this should be a more academic paper. It has the same sort of problem with the abstracts. Now you'll become specialists in abstract reading. Well, it does. Let's say it does say at the last. Well, first it's a weird abstract with 2 paragraphs. Usually abstracts are just 1 paragraph. But anyway, it does say what it does in the last paragraph. It says it's a review of 6 Customer 2.0 services. A review of 6 Customers 2.0 services shows that user input can be an essential feature of a supplied service, also in the sphere of consumption. So this is a hint of what is done. There's no information whatsoever about how those 6 cases were chosen. The remaining of the abstract is just context. So again, it's a poor example of how to build a paper. And you may by now be saying, well, when are we going to have a good paper in terms of format, right? Of course, we are dealing with a topic that fortunately doesn't have many good papers formally written, which means that you'll have the chance of writing the good stuff with respect to form, at least, right? When you have papers that are good in the form, the way that they're done, and if they are dealing with an interesting topic, they have a very good chance of being published, I would say, right? Nevertheless, we have to, and we have to think that this was written in 2006, so right at the beginning of Web 2.0, and the author was claiming here that the consumer, the customer, should be a vital part of Web 2.0 or the proposition of value of any organization. At the end of page 2, the authors present their objective in a clearer way. This paper studies how consumers produce information on consumption and how they use this information. We view these dynamics as the hardcore of Customers 2.0. I would say that if we had to briefly summarize what they consider to be Customer 2.0, I would say that it's professional amateurism, so the professional amateurs, the pro-ams, plus acting, so and then the aggregation of masses of other users voting and selecting and choosing whatever those professional amateurs have developed. So the authors claim that the professional amateurs would provide the depth of knowledge, because although they are amateur in the sense that they are not charging for the knowledge that they're bringing to a system, they're very knowledgeable amateurs. So that's why we call them professional amateurs. They provide depth of knowledge, and then the masses that will use the knowledge that the professional amateurs generate would provide for the breadth of knowledge, right? So depth of knowledge provided by the professional amateurs, and then the aggregation of people's saying thumbs up or thumbs down, decide, well, this helped me or this didn't help me or whatever, this is good or this is bad, providing us with the wisdom of the crowds. So specialists and the crowds reinforcing each other's participation there. One interesting thing that the authors say here I think it's a little further. I think here on page, I don't know, the pages are not numbered here, but they say there is a case for professional consumerism also at the individual level. The authors claim that we are all experts, at least on that single purchase that we made as customers, right? When I purchase a product from a company, I become an expert on that purchase, specific on that single purchase. I can tell others about how long it took for the merchandise to arrive. I can tell others about how easy it was to pay with my credit card or whatever. I can tell other customers about the quality of my perception of the quality of the products that I received, and so on and so forth. I become a specialist on that single event of buying that or making that purchase. Okay, and this is this is what he thinks that in this case you become even a professional amateur in saying, look, I have something to tell others because I experienced it myself. And another thing that the author says that is interesting, but I think it is aligned with other things that we have already read, is that amateurs, rather than professionals, are the innovative makers. Do you have an idea of what is it so? Basically, amateurs, they're not obliged to anything. They're not imprisoned by the ideas that they already had. They're not imprisoned by the knowledge that they have. Professionals don't give up their old ideas easily because their old ideas are their assets. They're known in the market for their ideas. They solve problems in the market because of those ideas. So they're not the ones that are going to realize that their ideas are wrong. Earlier today I said Microsoft took quite a while to understand that it should go to the clouds as everyone else had already done. Why so? Because it was a specialist in what it did. And it did well packaging products or packaging software and selling licenses. It was very difficult for Microsoft to give that away and start doing what others were already doing. It would become just another firm out there instead of being the firm as it used to be in its own paradigm. Okay, so this is why the author says here that amateurs rather than professionals are actually the innovative makers of the future. They have nothing to lose. Professionals always have to think about all the risks that they will have to undertake in order to change, and that makes them much more conservative than amateurs. But then amateurs, let the amateurs risk, and then we can check what is happening and then say, well, in that case, that amateur had a good idea there, right? After, for example, after an amateur thinks of a skateboard with a different shape, well, many others have thought of different shapes and have cracked their heads against the ground, but that one, and you didn't want to have anything to do with that. But when you see that one hasn't cracked his head against the ground, and in fact, the board that he or she designed is even safer than others, then you say, okay, now it's time for me to buy into that innovation. Okay, but not to start with the innovation. Just check what innovation is made available by amateurs.
Yeah, Professor.
Yeah.
It reminds me the case, for example, where the old banks make us.
I beg your pardon. The old
Banks. Let's say
old banks. Yeah.
traditional banks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When we have to open an account, we have to go to the bank, take all those documentations just to open an account. And nowadays, for instance, we have the success of new banks.
Yep.
Opening up accounts just through the app on the mobile phone.
And you know, one of the interesting things about these new banks that
Based on recommendations, yes.
Uh.
And they were amateurs
yeah.
in that regard.
And one interesting thing about these new banks is that at the beginning they do not pose any threat to the old banks, because whoever already has an account in a traditional bank is not even aware about them. You know, if you have an account in a traditional bank, you have no reason to look for alternatives, and you keep there, and those banks are happy because their traditional customers are with them. But there is a generation, a whole generation, a new generation that is starting their relationship with banks already with a bank that is totally different, that treats them in a different way, that respects them in a different way. It's not that they respect more, but it's they have an experience there that they will never go back to the traditional system. And you know what will happen to the traditional banks? They will be like, at some stage, they will be like Microsoft. They will either realize, well, look, now there's no way. I'll have to buy one of those. If they're rich enough, and many of them are rich organizations, they will buy into the new, and they will actually turn into into being the new. They will have to kill their old culture and keep the new culture, or they will die, because so there's no. I wouldn't say that they will die, because Microsoft hasn't died. You know, Microsoft has changed. It took a while, but many will. Many definitely will. In fact, many have already died. I think in Brazil we now only have. In fact, these days the central, I think it was a central bank director that was saying that the problem that the interest rate doesn't go down, it is because there are only 4 banks that actually matter in Brazil right now. So it's actually like an oligopoly, and they don't feel pressure. There's not enough competition. But these new banks, they are becoming relevant to a generation that right now doesn't have much money, doesn't have credit, doesn't have anything, but they're going to be the ones that will have money and credit 20 years from now, right? And they will be the ones that will then be responsible for most of the economy, and they will be connected to these new banks that started as amateurs. Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay. What else? then we have here another interesting thing is here when he says that experts and heavy users are typically the most conservative when it comes to adopting new practices and adopting radical innovation. Again, for me, I considered myself an expert Microsoft Office user. Right? It took me 20 years to live, and I'm still not sure if I definitely left Microsoft or not. You know, at these right moments, I don't have a license, but I may still have to buy a license from Microsoft in the future because I'm too connected to their way of doing things in the past. But it's my generation. It's not going to be, it's definitely not going to be my daughter's, right? She knows of the existence of Word. She uses Word the same way as she uses Google Docs, which I also use, but I can't think of as replacement. And for her, it's definitely a replacement, right? What else? It mentions the way Amazon uses professional amateurs to make reviews, and then the masses, the crowds, to say if they like those reviews or not in taking their own decisions. Let me see if we're far past the time. But let's have a look at some of the conclusions that they got with this paper. There's the stable one is an interesting one. Examples of Consumer 2.0 services, price comparison, product review, and then for each one of these, they have some interesting example here. A few of these examples are around. I was really interested about this live plasma. I went there, but found that it's sort of that. Of course, it was a beta project then, and it's at this moment it seemed to me that it's. I was really enthusiastic. I went there to check if that was an interesting place for you to refer. Let's say it's basically about music, and I thought, and they say that they're relating one singer or a band with others that have similar types of music. But I thought it seems to me that it's a little they probably it's not working very well. But then when you see their Facebook page from about 4 or 5 years ago, everyone was enthusiastic about it and saying yes. In fact, they were talking about their database going down, and then people saying, I can't live without this, please put it back on. And they saying, don't worry, in a few hours it will be back. So it meant something to people, but it seems that right now it's abandoned there. But they're talking about principles here. Sellers' review, and so on. Let's see, I just want to go straight to the conclusions. Okay, so the first thing here, information used to be produced and distributed by professionals for others to adopt, but these times are past. Right? This is the first thing, and of course, companies that are Web 2.0 oriented understand this very clearly. The new banks are Web 2.0 banks. The old ones work in the traditional way. Individuals' motives to produce information and the collective motive to consume that knowledge need to be incorporated in Consumer 2.0. So this is another. And individual professional amateurs got the movement going, but it's the collective that will keep it going in the future. Right? Well, I guess those were the papers that we had for today. Any impressions about this paper? I would have rejected it if it had come to the journal, right, the way it is. I like the idea. I would say, well, there's a lot of improvements to be made there. Mainly, you have to tell us. First thing, you chose 6. You chose a few cases. How did you choose them? And show and relate the results that were obtained to that empirical research that was made. Right? It's definitely an academic. It's an attempt of an academic paper, but it's the way it is. In 2006, in a new interesting subject, a new interesting topic, probably the journal was happy to take it because they knew that it would drive an audience. People would read. In fact, we are reading it 12 years later. But we have to do better than that with respect to format, at least. Okay? Any questions, any issues about the papers from today?
I'm not sure if you saw that, but there is a question on YouTube.
Is there? Let's see. I know that today people from Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul are not there. There are 4 or 5 students from there that are participating of or are watching one of their colleagues that is defending their master's thesis. Where is that? Could you tell us a bit about the difference between decentralized decision-making and distributed decision-making? I guess that was with respect to Eric Bonabo's paper, right? Let me go back to, let me just find here Bonabo's paper. I guess what we're talking about here is about the mechanism design, I think. Where am I? Yeah, I think this is where the authors talk about the 2 possibilities. Basically, a distributed decision is a decision that is being made by many people in which each one has a share on it. So it becomes it's just one decision that is being made, but it's being made by lots of people. And decentralized decision is making sure that the decision that you can have decision makers deciding on their own not at the core, at the periphery of the. If we thought of ourselves as working in a network as being neurons of a brain, we would say that decentralized decision would be decisions at the periphery, and it would be the opposite to taking the decision or the decision being taken centralized by the owners of the power, for example, right? I would say that we probably have several different ways of having, for example, distributed decisions where many people contribute to one decision. It could even be voting. We will end up having lots of people participating in the same decision, but it would be one single decision, right? After we voted, we would all go the same way, right? The decision would be specifically one. And when we're talking about decentralized decisions, we're saying that at the periphery, each one will be taking their own decision, and of course, all these decisions being taken individually will turn out to move the world or the system somewhere, right? But it's let me see. For example, writing an essay for Wikipedia. Is that distributed decision or decentralized decision? It will probably be both, right? It will be decentralized decision. Someone will write a draft, right? When someone writes the article, it's decentralized decision. It was just one of the the neurons, or one of the brains in the crowds that wrote that, right? This is a decentralized decision. And then after that decentralized decision happens, we will have other distributed decisions, that is other people fine-tuning the paper, changing a few things, and so that at the end you get to a consensus, to a paper that is, okay, now this is something that's, I think it's never going to be frozen, okay? It's never going to be to you say, okay, now nobody touches this any longer because we already think it's perfect, right? I don't think that Wikipedia has this kind of policy that after a while no changes can be made. It can always be, changes can always be made, but I would say that there will probably be a period in which there will be several people working on improving an article, and after that article has been improved and everyone is sort of happy with it, then they will move on somewhere else, and you'll see that if there is any change there, it's going to be very rarely that it will occur, right? So I'm not sure if this is what, I don't know, who was it that was asking? Oh, Youssef. I'm not sure, Youssef, if that's what you were asking, but maybe this is an example that I can give right now. Any other questions by you guys here? So let's have a break, some 20 minutes, and then we'll come back and try and discuss. You're quiet today. Today I try to provoke you a little more for some real interaction here, but then we'll do that on Moodle and prove. No, yeah, exactly, and we always have a problem with this. I have to you ask me something, and I have to sort of try and repeat your asking, because otherwise this doesn't capture. So I've already noticed that this is good to capture my voice, but for some it is very directional. Okay, so back in 15 minutes or so, 15, 20 minutes.